I think when it comes to entrepreneurs of color, one of the things I've noticed is that we're not allowed to build and then exit. We're not allowed to sort of grow something and then move on to something else, which I think is really a disservice. If you look at most of the successful companies in terms of IPOs, their founders had built something else before, sometimes many things before. Some things were successful, some things were not. Like I was looking at the filings for Lemonade, which is the insurance company, and just reading through, I like to read through IPO filings. I'm weird like that, but I was looking through and they had like a description and they were talking about the backgrounds of the executive team. And the executive team had all founded major things before. One was one of the founders of Fiverr, right? With the sort of outsourced talent platform. And so they had all founded things before. So then when it comes to Lemonade, which is their biggest sort of win, they were able to win because they had a lot of other smaller wins before that and knew how to build.
Hey guys, welcome to the Rozy Effect. I'm your host, Rozy Amponsa. You see here, the Rozy Effect, we're giving you the keys to lead your digital transformation. Today's guest, Kathryn Finney, the queen in tech. Kathryn Finney is a tech entrepreneur, futurist, active angel investor, and writer. Named by Inc. magazine as one of the most influential women in tech, and yes, she lives it. In 2012, she created Digital Undivided, a groundbreaking social enterprise focused on creating a world where women own their work. Kathryn started the social startup after selling her online media company, TBF Group, and building a lifestyle community for the pioneering online community Blog Her. She grew DID, Digital Undivided, from a single idea to a dynamic institution with a 7-figure budget, 20 plus staff, 2 offices, and partnerships with major institutions such as Pivotal Ventures, Microsoft for Startups, UBS, JP Morgan Chase, and so forth. Now, after 8 years as CEO, she stepped down to become the first Black woman business author at Portfolio Penguin Books. A White House champion of change and a past member of the National Advisory Council on Innovation and Entrepreneurship, appointed by the Obama administration, Kathryn is also a former general partner in the Harriet Fund, the first venture capital fund focused on Black and Latinx women founders. She currently chairs the Dooney Fund, which has made over 1,600 micro investments in companies led by Black women. Yes. A Yale-trained epidemiologist, Kathryn has received numerous honors and awards, including the Echoing Green Fellowship, Eisenhower Fellowship, Entrepreneurs Magazine Woman to Watch, Grace Hopper ABIE Award, Marie Claire's 10 Women to Watch, Ebony Power 100, Black Enterprise 40 and the 40. I could go on. She is a dope woman in tech. Kathryn was honored by the Bureau of Manhattan with the Kathryn Finney Appreciation Day. She's also received an honorary doctorate from Mount Holyoke College and was inducted into both the African American Alumni Hall of Fame at Rutgers University and Spelman College's Game Changers Academy. We're digging deep into the opportunity that is presented to us today when we talk about innovating in tech as a tech entrepreneur or as an entrepreneur building a career in tech. Let's get into the conversation. Thank you so very much and taking time to join me here today at the Rozy Effect.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Woo! Let's get into it. You've done so much when we talk about the impact of technology across Black women, Latinx women. But even before we get into that, when did that transition happen for you? Because I know you're well trained as, public health epidemiologist. I come from a healthcare background as well with a biology degree, but you stepped it up a notch. There was a passion there. When did that transition happen for you?
Oh gosh, technology has always been a part of my life. I have had a front row seat to the impact of technology to transform really an entire community. So I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, grew up there. My father was a brewery worker. Found himself at a workforce development course, took a class in C++. So those of you who know, computing is like the foundational computing language.
Yeah.
Fell in love, got an internship at 36. I mean, he literally fell in love with C++. He was in love with my mom too. He fell in love with that and took an internship at IBM and then worked his way up the ranks, became an engineer at Microsoft, became an executive at EMC. And all of this was happening while I was a child. So I had a front row seat to tech, to digital, really transforming my family's life.
Wow.
And so it always was a part of my life. I just didn't go directly into that because that would have been too logical when I went to college. And so at first was studying public health and actually political science, got sick while studying abroad and got a real interest in public health. I saw the health disparities, the type of care that I got as an American versus others because I was American, because I had US dollars, because I had access to capital, I was able to get better healthcare. And that really had a big impact on me. So I came back, went to Yale in public health and worked as an epidemiologist for a while. But I always had this interest in tech, always had this interest in entrepreneurship. I had always been an entrepreneur. So when I moved after graduate school and worked abroad and came back home to the States because I was a sick parent, I was really trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. I had this goal that I was going to save the world. I was going to work abroad, had all these like great goals and ideas that you have when you're, 23, 24, and came back and realized that it was really difficult to do. And so I had started a blog and I had just gotten married. Really married my tech talent and started this blog. And really it was to connect with others. At that time, and this was in the early 2000s, it was really difficult to connect. We didn't have Facebook. We didn't have Twitter. We didn't have, FaceTime. All of these sort of technologies now that allow us to connect with each other. And thank God we have them right now. It would be really difficult to go through this moment without them. We didn't have that. And so the way that I was able to connect with family and friends was to really create a blog in which I was writing about mostly shopping. That blog turned into a business. And really the trajectory of the blog followed the trajectory of the rise of the influencer and the rise of social media. So I started 2 years before Facebook even existed, 3 years before Twitter. In fact, when I started, Google had just introduced AdWords, which was a way to monetize content online. Because prior to that, it was really hard. Like no one had thought to monetize content. It was, people were trying different things, but it wasn't really like, how do we monetize this content on the web? I know it's interesting now, almost 20 years later to think that people didn't know how to make money off of content on the web. But at that point, they really didn't.
Right.
And so the blog followed that sort of trajectory. And I remember the first check I got from AdWords. It was like $16. It was so exciting, right? Because it was like, oh my goodness, I can actually make money
out of it. Exactly.
It was a business model. Right. And so was able to really follow the rise of that. And that's how I got sort of more into tech, more into the entrepreneurship side. At that time, in the early 2000s, there wasn't any what you see is what you get, meaning you actually had to know how to code in order for your pictures to show up on your website. So I had to learn how to build SQL databases. I had to learn JavaScript and HTML and all of those things just so that the pair of shoes that I bought for $13 at Nordstrom's Rack would be able to be seen online. There was a lot that went into it, but I'm really glad that I had to do all of that because it taught me really how the web works. It taught me a lot about development. So even now I don't do necessarily development work myself directly. I'm not coding myself, but I know enough to be able to work and communicate with others who are.
Wow. Wow. You know what's so unique about the way that your journey has gone over time in an era where, all these, as you said, connecting platforms were not there, but you had an interest and you went ahead and you sort of went ahead and did it, whether you foresaw their future or whether, there was a foundational sort of need that you needed to sort of bridge that gap. So when we look at today, the impact of the pandemic, and sometimes we feel like, where is the opportunity? How are we going to be able to look at where our career is going? What businesses can we even start that can be beneficial? How are you thinking about, give me your perspective on that, in that millennial today looking to build that career?
It's so interesting. My husband often jokes with me that I don't have that gene that tells you not to jump off of something. There's a gene that we all have that tells you not to jump off the bridge, not to do the crazy thing. And apparently I don't have that gene. That's not part of me. And so I think the interesting way to think about this time period that we're in is a quote that has really helped center me through this process. And that is, what if we're not in the darkness of the tomb, but in the darkness of the womb? Meaning, what if we're not at the end of things? What if we're at the beginning of something and something that can be birthed, right? And so what can we birth from this moment? What can come out of this moment? Because we are in a very different world. The world is never going back to the way it was pre-March.
Nope.
And I think for a lot of people, it's almost like a mourning, right? Like kind of the way things used to be. And I think a lot of us haven't quite made that shift. However, at some point, we're going to have to make the shift, right? Because we are living in a historic moment right now. It's happening to us as we are living it, right? And so the world is not going to be the same. So there's an opportunity in that, right? And so one of the areas to think about is, there used to be this concept of 3 spaces, which was your home, your office, and leisure. Yeah. It's a concept that's been talked about a lot prior to this.
I bet.
However, all of that's collapsed into one, right?
Diffused.
There's no third space or second space. It's like all one big space. Like you live in your home, you work in your home, you have leisure in your home, right? Wow. And so seeing that we're in this space, right, where everything is in one, like what type of ideas can come from that? What type of ideas can come to help make our space more manageable, right? What type of ideas can come? I have a 5-year-old. What type of new ideas in education? What type of new ideas in entertainment? Like, please, if you could figure out a way to entertain a 5-year-old for like an hour or 2 for me, that is something that I will gladly pay for.
Oh, it's a win.
Right? Because
I can relate with my nieces and nephews being here, spending time with them. They're working, they're going to school. It's like everything is within this enclosed space. So being able to find an opportunity where you can engage them outside, something that refreshes their brain and still allows for us to stay within the confines of what we're working with. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
And so it's rethinking, right? There's great opportunities that come from periods of great disruption, right? And we're in a disruptive moment right now. And so how do we rethink what we've always done? How is shopping being rethought? For example, I haven't been in a Target in I don't know how long. We do pickup. And so one of the things that we went to go pick up some items, and I noticed there was like no kiosks. Like all the pickup people were just like out there in a parking lot. And I was like, someone needs to create little kiosks for them. That could be a business right there. Like kiosks for pickup people, which has like everything you need for people to be able to manage the pickup process at a place like Target. Right? That's a business opportunity right there. When I started the Duty Fund, which was the fund that I started in April, it was in honor of my grandmother, but it was really to help Black women, entrepreneurs like myself, who were going through a particularly tough time. If you remember, the PPP funds were not reaching Black entrepreneurs. And so we started this fund. We ended up giving out 1,600 micro investments.
Wow.
To Black women entrepreneurs. But one of the things I saw from that was like the ingenuity that came out of that. Like I learned of businesses that I did not even know exist. Like there was one company led by 2 Black women who had a whole company around portable sinks. right?
Oh,
And I didn't even know that was a thing, like the portable sinks you see in, portable restrooms or in
yeah.
food trucks. That's a thing. Somebody has to make those sinks.
Mm.
And there was a business that did that. And I couldn't help thinking, well, right now we're in the hand washing moment, right? Where we need lots of hand washing, things like that. You know, how could this business be sort of retrofitted or changed a little bit to be in this moment right now? Because obviously we're washing hands a lot. And I think this is going to be the future, is going to be us washing hands a lot and caring about that sort of
Our health
hygiene.
and our exactly.
Yeah. So there's a lot of opportunity right now. And I think if we think of this moment as not, oh my gosh, mourning the life that we once have, but thinking of the life that we can have now and what the opportunities are, I think it's a really helpful way of us thinking forward and sort of rethinking what can be done and thinking of amazing businesses and opportunities.
A time in the womb. Yes, yes. What I also love is you've really seen the trajectory and growth when we talk about technology transformation. Like you can write a whole book about that. And you've
Yeah.
also seen what individuals have opportunities when it comes to a seat at the table when impacting technology transformation. We are here 2020. A lot has happened when we talk about racial bias and the push around that. We've seen organizations, join a list or pledge to something. Where does the responsibility lie, or what does that advice look like in terms of leadership being aware of the landscape that we're working with, the community, the customers that we need to be focused at, and how do they go about actually changing from just a conversation or joining some list or pledging something to implementation that actually impacts the end consumer that they desire to serve?
Well, I think one of the first things is to really understand who your customer is and what drives them. And I'm always amazed by how few businesses really understand that and really understand what drives them. And a lot of the reasons why there's that disconnect is because they don't actually have people on staff who understands the community. And so case in point, it's amazing how, when you look at tech in particular, how the lack of people of color at every part of the product development process has led to epic failures. And one example would be sensors, right? So I have a challenge. I fly a lot. When I go into the airport or in the airplane and I run my hand over the sensors, sometimes they don't work very well.
Wow.
Why don't they work very well? Well, because people who had brown skin and darker skins weren't necessarily involved in the product development process. Now, if you had someone who had darker skin involved, even at any stage, even the QA stage, right? You would have noticed, our sensors don't work very well for people of color. But because we weren't involved, it shipped, the product shipped with this epic failure in which more than half of the world would have a problem using.
Wow.
Another example of that is even in search engine, right? For a long time in search engines, if you search for Black people in terms of image searches, it would turn up gorillas, right? Now, if you had at any part of that process at Google, at any part, right? Google, major company that does thousands of tests, right? Like before they actually make a product public. If you had somebody who had thought to search for Black people or brown people or anyone in that who had that cultural reference, you would have discovered this problem before it became even a PR nightmare for you, right? So I think what the challenge is that in order to understand this moment and to understand what a customer needs, you need to hire people from that community. And you need to hire people who have a connection to that community and understand that community. There are some things and some mistakes that are just so obvious that if you had a person of color, just one, right? Obviously we want more, but if you had just one even, it would have been discovered and it would have saved you a lot of money, a lot of PR, right, mistakes. It would have saved the company, right, the bottom line.
Yeah.
But I think what's happening now is that we're in such a shareholder capitalism mentality. There's been a lot of discussions about shareholder versus stakeholder. Shareholder meaning the companies are so focused on giving the utmost value to their shareholders or owners that they're not looking at it from a stakeholder perspective, which is everyone that's impacted, your employees, your customers, like looking at it from this holistic standpoint, that they don't care about having people of color taking that moment to think through the stakeholders. All they care about is how do we maximize the value for our shareholder? How do we ship this quickly, get everyone to put it in and to buy it, and then we'll worry about all the other stuff later. And I think we're seeing a shift now more to the stakeholder model.
I remember a conversation like that in business school, and the question becomes, at what point do you realize that, you know, where does the greater value lie if you're focusing just on the shareholder, right, versus those that actually the products that you're putting out is impacting the community in which you are positioned to deliver in. Today, I see a lot of organizations, especially within healthcare, an area that I'm in, creating solutions to serve populations that might have high disease rates with diabetes or whatever it might be. And obviously that population has a higher percentage of individuals of color, the whole 9 yards. But then when you look at the leadership leading this technology, you know, positioned to deliver into the marketplace, there's such a mismatch. And it's like, where does accountability lie? Where does accountability lie for these leaders to be able to realize that in order to deliver the solution successfully? And when you're talking healthcare, that could be a life or death situation. It could be highly impactful. You get the wrong data. I mean, whoo. And then research also shows that in the next like couple of decades, when we look at the customer base, we're talking about a much diverse customer. And so at what point do you value, you know what I mean, being able to impact that? When we talk about digital transformation and building teams, bringing in the right sort of representation on that end consumer you're going to serve is important. What else would you like to share in terms of identifying that right skill set that can take you from just an idea? You had Digital Undivided as an idea and built it out into such a successful platform and value. What was that journey look like? Who were those individuals? Give me a bit more on that story.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I started Digital Undivided after selling my first company, the blog that became a media company.
Wow.
And I was able to start it because I had built something successful before. I think when it comes to entrepreneurs of color, one of the things I've noticed is that we're not allowed to build and then exit. We're not allowed to sort of grow something and then move on to something else, which I think is really a disservice. If you look at most of the successful companies in terms of IPOs, their founders had built something else before, sometimes many things before. Some things were successful, some things were not. Like I was looking at the filings for Lemonade, which is the insurance company, and just reading through, I like to read through IPO filings. I'm weird like that, but I was looking through. And they had like a description and they were talking about the backgrounds of the executive team. And the executive team had all founded major things before. Like one was one of the founders of Fiverr, right? With the sort of outsourced talent platform. And so they had all founded things before. So then when it comes to Lemonade, which is their biggest sort of win, they were able to win because they had a lot of other smaller wins before that and knew how to build. But as founders of color, we're not giving this sort of that opportunity, right? To build and exit, build and exit, build and exit. So I was able to start Digital Undivided because this was like maybe the third thing I had started. And I had one thing that I did with my family. We owned a series of dry cleanings, and that was like, did not win. And a failure. And I learned an awful lot from that failure. I had another thing before that, the Budget Fashionista and TBF group, that was really successful. So when I came into Digital Undivided, I had experience. I knew how to build successful things. I also had a network from the other things I had built that I could draw on. So I remember our first conference, Focus 100 in 2012. we had like this amazing group of people there. And Andreessen Horowitz was one of our early supporters. We had Ogilvy was a supporter. And this was prior to people being interested in Black women. And so people were like, how did you get these people to come? Like, how did you get them to support you with money? And I was like, because I had something successful before and they knew me from that. So I was able to draw on the network. So one of the things is for founders, particularly founders of color, is like really accessing your network. Another thing is don't be afraid to build and then sell. And that's not something that we really talk about a lot in our community. We often focus on legacy building legacy companies, sometimes called derogatorily, lifestyle companies. But we're focused on that instead of focusing on, I'm going to build this and I'm going to sell it quickly so that I can go on to my next thing. And so that would be the other thing I would say. But I took that network and was able to really build on that. I also knew who to hire. So one of the founding team members happened to be someone who I had worked very closely with at the Budget Fashionista. And then when I went to work for BlogHer, which was another woman-led startup, I was able to work with her there. And so this was like the fourth thing that we worked on together. So I knew who to hire and I knew who to help me get started. Unless you've done something before, it's kind of hard to know that. I also learned what my leadership style was. Who are the people I need in order to be successful? For me to be the best me. And I think sometimes as CEOs, we focus so much on others and really developing talent, which is incredibly important, but we also have to focus on ourselves a little bit. And I probably learned that lesson more when I became a mom. As a mom, your instinct is to like do everything for everyone else, particularly your children. Yeah. But I learned that when I'm at my best, so are my kids. And the same goes for a company. When you as a CEO are at your best, your company is also at its best too. And that's really important to remember and to know. And those things became very important in building the company. And also building relationships and asking for what it is that you need. It's a woman. It's very hard. As a woman of color, it's even harder to ask for what you need, particularly in terms of financial support, because there's a whole bunch of issues that have nothing to do with us personally around capital and women of color. Right? A lot of issues that are just like, oh my goodness. I just want to build a successful company. I don't want to do a seminar on race relations. Right? For you, just let me talk about my company. I do not want to have to assuage your guilt or over-explain myself or what have you. But what I've learned is getting and finding the people quickly who are there to support you, so that you don't get bogged down into doing, racial sensitivity seminars, which often as a woman of color, I found myself doing, and I was like, how does this service me? Because it doesn't. I'm not getting the funding, right? So really getting, as a founder of color in particular, getting very quick to the people who can write checks. And one of the ways that you do that is you look at who has supported people of color before. And that's always a tip that I say to any founders that have like an angel investment, or even when I was at DID, was if you look for investors who've invested in people like you, you will find people who have already been convinced of the market opportunity, and that saves you work. It's the same advice that you would say to someone who's like, if you were doing an e-commerce site, find other investors who invest in e-commerce sites, right? Because they understand the value of e-commerce sites, they understand the business. It's the same thing when you are a woman or a person of color. Looking for investors who've already invested in that space. They understand, they know, they've already been convinced that this is a unique market opportunity. And so do that. It's been amazing to me to hear from founders that, they've been actually given the opposite advice. If you don't want anybody who's invested in people of color because you're going to be tagged as a person of color business, and you don't want this. Yeah, and it's like, well, look, but at the end of the day, you're an entrepreneur and you need financing for growth.
Right.
Does it matter if this person is also investing in other people of color. Fine. You need financing for growth. That means they understand the market. Don't get hung up on these issues that have nothing to do with you and the growth of your business.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are the things that I've learned. And now that I left DID in June after 8 years, and working on my next thing, that network I've built is incredibly strong. Wow. And so with my next thing, which hopefully I'll be talking about really soon,
well, now it's going to be ask you about.
I'm sorry.
I said, so now I can't ask you about it.
Here's what I can say about it. It is the next project I'm working on. It's a for-profit idea to rethink this concept of capital flow and creating a space where everyone can win, where the investor, where the founder, where even myself as the CEO of the company, everybody wins. One of my frustrations in the work that I did and even before was that this sort of scarcity model was put on people of color. Like there was a finite amount of money and only 3 Black people could get it. Yep. Or, that if I work with you, somehow that's going to take away from me. Mm-hmm. And it was this scarcity model that was created. And so what happens if we dismantle that? I think that scarcity model was created to really hold us in as founders of color, to make us think that there were limits to what we could do when there were no limits. It was just arbitrarily set. Right. And so how do we rethink that? How do we think in terms of abundance for our community? And what would that look like? And this idea is heavily influenced by my own family's history. My great-grandfather had a restaurant in Tulsa, in the Greenwood section. In Tulsa, many people know about the Tulsa riots, were bombed out. It forced my family to move to the border of Kansas, which is where my mother's from, where my whole entire family's from.
Your family is actually a direct line of the impact of the bombings.
Yes. In fact, my great uncle, my grandmother was born 2 years after, so she was born right on the Oklahoma-Kansas border. And my great uncle, who passed away like 2 years ago, was actually a baby. He was one of the last living people who were actually there when it happened. And my family spent a couple of weeks in what many would call a version of a concentration camp. And so they were forced to move to the border of Kansas. And so that had a really big impact on me. I have a picture of my grandmother, my great-grandfather, who's her father, my mother, and myself. My great-grandfather being the person who was forced to move when I was a little baby. But so this interest of like, how do we create a system where we all win is deeply, deeply personal for me. It's not just, something that I'm just connected with.
Oh, wow.
And I often wonder what would happen if my grandparents were given the space to excel. If they and their neighbors would have just been left alone, right? Not even helped. You don't even have to help, right? Just left alone, right?
What would have happened?
What would have happened?
You don't even need the resources.
Yeah, like what type of resources? And it's interesting, when the Watchmen show came on HBO, and they centered around Tulsa the first season, and my great uncle, he actually went viral because a cousin posted this image of him and said, our uncle was a part of it, and it went viral. It's something like 6,000, 7,000 retweets. I mean, it was like really, really crazy. And this uncle who was like a character in real life, he of course since had passed away before this, but he would have loved that. I was like, oh my God, he's like famous. But I was trying to explain to my grandmother about what was going on. Right. This is her family. This is her brother. This is her parents that they're talking about. And so I often think of like, what would have happened? Like, could my family have been, I don't know, could that have turned into the future McDonald's? Or what would have happened if they were allowed to just excel without any of these outside forces? And so I think right now we're in an interesting opportunity of like, how do we do that? Right? How do we reclaim that? And how can others support us, right, in this effort? And I think one of the biggest things I say to people is, if you want to support Black companies, one of the biggest things you can do is to make sure that others are not creating barriers for us. Even without you in a check, you can do that. You can definitely shop our products. We love that. But like, just make sure when you see someone else creating a barrier, you are not powerless. Like, stand up and say, hey, this person is creating this artificial barrier. This person is destroying this person's opportunity. You can say that. That in and of itself is an amazing help. Because I think if someone had stopped the rioters, the violence in Tulsa, maybe my family would have had the next McDonald's, right? Maybe there would have been, the next Standard Oil, because there was a lot of oil in Oklahoma. And that was also one of the big challenges too, is, who knows, maybe the Shell gas stations. I mean, who knows what may have come out if people would have been left alone.
Wow. This is such a powerful story. And I cannot wait to see how this kind of births and forms itself. An interesting thing that I'd love to get your perspective on is the mindset of people. And so you've gone through this generation of impact. And we look especially in our America today, Black and brown folks, and the journey, that impact has really kind of sewn into the limitations of today. So how would you go about impacting someone's mindset for it to be beneficial for this foundation or this platform that you're looking to build?
It's so interesting you asked that. My niece, Mariah, is 22. And she texted me to ask me for some advice. This is right when George Floyd happened. I grew up in Minneapolis. I went to elementary school about a mile away from where George Floyd was murdered. And so she was very involved, and she was asking me for my advice. And I said to her, and this is grammatically incorrect, but I said, we don't know nothing. That anybody who tells you for certain how to be in this world right now is full of BS. I actually didn't say it in a nice way. They're full of, because we're in this time period where things, like, we're in a historical moment, right? Things are shifting. And so the mindset to have right now is, what are the possibilities? So instead of asking, like, what should I do? Think of, like, what can be done? Because by asking what should I do, you are putting limits on yourself. You're saying that, like, I can only do the possibilities are only in this certain, like, area, when there really are a lot of things that can be done. I mean, I don't know if many of us would have thought come February that we would have a moment in which our democracy was so directly challenged, right? I don't think anybody would have thought that we would be here, right? So the possibilities are endless, right? So rethinking and saying, what, instead of what can I do, like, what should I do? What can be done? Like, how do I think outside? There are no limits anymore. And that's what I said to my niece. I said, there are no limits. Prior to March, sure, we were living in a very different world. But right now, there is like 3 people alive, and they were babies when the last pandemic happened, right? There was no one who was alive when the last pandemic happened. So anyone telling you this is how it should be, they don't know. It's speculation. It's, assumptions based upon what their understanding of history is. No one actually knows because they weren't alive. Yeah. So you're alive right now. You're getting the expert knowledge. And you have just as much knowledge of living in a pandemic, living in a world where democracy is challenged as I do, even though I'm older than you. Yeah. So there are no experts. And I think thinking in that sort of mindset of, like, the possibilities are endless because of that. Right? You could do whatever you want to do right now because the possibilities are endless. Like, who would have thought? And a good example of this is remember prior to March, and I always feel funny when I have to say that to people because March seems like it was like 10 years ago. When
It really feels like it.
corporations, right? When corporations said, we cannot have our employees work from home. We all remember that, right? Can't have our employees work from home. It's going to mess up productivity. It's not going to be good. We're going to, our idea is not going to be protected. I mean, they had a slew of reasons why people did not work from home.
Oh my God. Everybody used to get on the phone with my girlfriends, and one of them, her work clearly could have been done from virtual, from home.
Yeah.
And just how they were just so strong. It's just like, you're not going to work out of the office. And there's nothing that's going to change that. A month later, the pandemic hits. And guess what? And so and what I love about this idea of, hey, that person that is giving you this expert advice, you have exactly the same thing because you're living in it now. And I think sometimes maybe individuals might speak from a point of fact or a point of knowing, whatever it is, and that might kind of trump your idea or your thought process. But I just love how you've positioned it in the sense that, no, we're both living in this moment at this time. And so you are experiencing it, and therefore you can identify the same opportunities in that same capacity, and taking advantage of it.
You know, it's so interesting. It's a little bit of a fear that I think particularly those who are more in corporate structures, that as an entrepreneur, I don't have. Again, it goes back to I don't have that fear of jumping off the bridge, right? Yeah. That stops me from taking the leap. Mm-hmm. I think with corporate America, it's that fear, right? Because if you don't want to be wrong, and I don't have a problem with being wrong. And so I think we're now getting to this point where people are kind of questioning existing structures that were placed on us. Mm-hmm. People are questioning how things are done. Because, you know, you told me in March I couldn't work from home. Remember, not in March, in January, I wanted to work from home for a month. And you told me no, that it couldn't be done. And now I'm thinking maybe you just told me that because you wanted to foster a certain idea or culture, but actually it could have been done. So now I'm starting to question other things that you said, right? Ooh. And I think that that's kind of where we're at now. Like, it used to be, you couldn't, and regardless of our politics and what you may think about it, but it used to be, you couldn't be a political novice and come into politics and just sort of run this straight line about what it is that you want to do. You couldn't do that, right? That was the idea that you had to compromise. You had to do all these different things in politics. And that has been totally disrupted, right? Even though compromise is probably the better way to govern, you didn't have to do it. That's what we've learned. Yeah. We've learned a lot that has disrupted the way that we currently think in our structures. And so this is a great opportunity. I really think that if we look at this as an opportunity to do things differently, I think that will help. I think that will help people personally get through this time period, because it's something about being in this really disruptive time where things are murky and you're unsure and you feel unstable. And it's creating something out of that, like creating something positive out of that. It's something about that, right? That gets you believing in the ability to build. It gets you in the ability of humanity, right? And so I think for those who have that entrepreneurial spirit, those who are thinking, or even if you're an entrepreneur, right? You're at a corporation,
you're looking to build,
like take this opportunity to birth something new.
Got it. Wow. Sometimes we might think starting a business means, maybe just doing something small and just calling it a day.
Yeah.
How should we be thinking about taking advantage of this technology and creating businesses and solving problems that actually impact the masses?
Yeah, I mean, I think every business has to solve a problem. Because if it doesn't solve a problem, and doesn't solve a problem for a lot of people, then it's really a hobby, right? And so really thinking of, is this a problem that's big enough that and important enough that people are willing to pay for a solution? right? And I think that getting in that sort of mindset is really, really helpful. A lot of times I see founders who are so into their idea. They're so into, because they love the idea and everyone around them is telling them that they love the idea, but it's not a business. It's no one's paying for it. It's a hobby. And so I think really centering, like, what is the problem? Is it big enough? And is it such a sticky problem that people will actually pay for it? And there's something about paying, like I once saw there's like 12 like different thought processes people go through between seeing an item and buying it.
By the time they make it,
there's all these different actions that happen. So if someone's buying this from you, there is such, they actually, it's difficult, right? It's a thought process that they have. So you can look at that and see what people actually do, and purchasing it and using that using that as an indication of whether or not this idea is sort of big enough, a problem is big enough. I think that's really important. And that's, again, whether you're a traditional entrepreneur or you're an entrepreneur, like, is this problem big enough? So even if you're within a corporation, you might stumble upon a problem that might be really interesting and that you want to develop a solution for. You have to ask yourself, is this problem big enough that it can be market driven? And that can be really, really hard when you're an idealist, as many entrepreneurs are, to sort of get to that. But that's really, really important. And then once you have that established, then it's figuring out how to connect with as many people as possible for whom this is a problem and for whom will purchase it. And I think what's interesting now in the digital space is because everything right now is by nature digital, that whatever you do, you don't have, it's a vast market. You don't have to be in person. If you have a food product, you have to think of how to connect with someone digitally about your food product. How do you get them to smell your food when they can't smell it? How do you get them to taste it when they can't taste it? You can't, I don't think they do. I haven't been in a grocery store in a very long time, but I don't think they do the tastings that they used to have in grocery stores, right? Probably now with COVID. So if you have a food product, how are you getting people to try it? How are you connecting with them? You have to start digitally, right? So you have to rethink, how do I get people to smell and sense it? I've seen a lot of people start to really use, for example, influencers on Instagram, taking amazing pictures. Some people doing some interesting thing with sound. You can hear the steak sizzling, so that helps you connect with, that connects with your memory of what steak smells like, right? All of those sort of things. So as an entrepreneur, using these digital tools that we have now to rethink and recreate what you used to do in person. And that's what's another thing that's going to be birthed out of this. And that's super exciting. If you could figure out how to get people to smell via their phone, and smell is such a powerful sense. I mean, that would be incredible. I do think that's probably coming up next, right? Like, a attachment that you put to your phone that allows you to test out perfumes, or possibly, and I don't know if this is happening, but if not, it's a great business idea. If you have a perfume company, Coty, developing like a USB where you can like send out a tiny little USB like sense thing that people connect to their phones, and it helps them to test the smell of like a perfume or something, right? Like, wouldn't that be awesome? And it probably could be done for really cheap because of technology. But I say all that to say, for entrepreneurs to really use this opportunity to rethink how to recreate these things we did offline, online. And there's a lot of ways to do that.
And I think this season has really created a unique opportunity for us to be rethinking that and us to be figuring out what that looks like. Wow, Kathryn, this has been an amazing conversation.
Thank you.
You shared some golden nuggets that I know our listeners are going to be digging into. I am so grateful for your time.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you for joining in on our conversation today. What was one thing that stood out to you about our discussion? I loved how she honed in on where the opportunity is today, how leaders can be thinking about solving problems, both as an entrepreneur and an entrepreneur, and the way that we go about thinking about our mindset and being able to solve problems that create change for the masses. Joining over the conversation on the website, therozyeffect.com, or on social media. You can find us on Instagram at The Rozy Effect, Facebook, LinkedIn at The Rozy Effect. Follow us, joining on the growing community. We have packed amazing conversations that we're going to be releasing this season 2 for an individual that's really looking forward to take advantage of technology transformation in this era, building businesses that's creating change and creating and solving problems and impacting our generation, and entrepreneurs looking to build their careers, really build themselves within an organization and create change within the organization. There's nowhere else to be, so might as well click that subscribe button and join in. So yes, when you hop on over to therozyeffect.com, join our growing community. And as usual, thank you so much for your time in joining today's conversation. I am your host, Rozy Amponsa. Thank you for listening to The Rozy Effect.